On this episode of China Unscripted, China is facing crises on all sides. The West is turning against it, and so are its own people. Is collapse imminent? Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
And, we should probably address the elephant in the room, Shelley. Matt's mustache. It's fantastic.
Okay,
glorious.
Yes. For a second, I thought you were calling me the elephant in the room.
That's what I thought, Chris.
All right. Well, I mean,
was
but Matt's
trying
mustache.
to do a fake out,
Yes.
like, hey, where have you been?
But we're going to talk about the mustache.
That's what I was going for.
It is quite substantial, the mustache. It's looking particularly tufty today.
I like
Oh,
it.
why, thank you.
I like it.
Yeah. Do you feel yourself having more confidence and authority as like a news anchor?
Yeah, or when I put on my aviator sunglasses, people think I'm a police officer, so that gives me some additional authority / hate, depending on who I'm addressing. So it's not a complete win, but it's fun to have.
Is it in August fun to have a mustache?
I mean, is it in August fun to have a full beard, Chris?
It's always fun to have a full beard.
So there we go. It's always half as fun to have a mustache.
I think a beard is more than just have. Well, whatever. So yeah, Shelley, how was the pocket dimension? You were infiltrating the PLA. You caused the purging in the rocket forces. You've been up to some good sabotage.
I am really tired, Chris.
Uh-huh.
We'll just leave it at that.
Okay. We'll leave it at that. So no guest today. It's just going to be us, but we have a lot of interesting things to talk about.
We haven't had a Just Us one in more than 4 months.
I know, it's been a long time. And I think the thing I kind of want to focus on today is just like the amount of tremendous pressure facing the Chinese Communist Party. My heart bleeds for them. They were such a meritocracy, working so hard.
Such a technocracy. Something.
Now they're about to get rectocracy. But yeah, this is really like a fascinating time to see like all of the things that are kind of happening at once for the Chinese Communist Party. And we'll kind of go through them.
So the theme of this episode is the Chinese Communist Party.
The Chinese Communist Party, is it going to collapse this month? ? Exclamation mark. Thumbnail, Xi Jinping looking sad with fire in the background and lightning over Zhongnanhai.
There you go.
Yeah.
The ghost of Jiang Zemin looming behind Xi Jinping.
Oh, this is great. I'm glad this is being recorded. And I'm glad you all clicked on it because how could you not?
I have definitely seen many, there are like these Chinese kind of pundits that have like they call them in Chinese like self-media, but like they're kind of just they do what we do in a lot of sense and analyze like Chinese politics and stuff like that. I have definitely seen thumbnails that look like what we just described.
I remember back during the whole Bo Xilai thing, there was Xi Jinping kicking a soccer ball, but the soccer ball was the face of Bo Xilai.
It was just his head, right?
Yeah, and I think there really was like Tiananmen in the background and lightning and fire. It was beautiful.
That's how you get people to click.
Yeah. Well, that huge scandal was more than a decade ago, and the Chinese Communist Party has still endured. Yeah. So
so are you saying?
I'm saying they're in a crisis now, but they've seen bad crises that they've.
So
overcome.
You're saying my framing of Communist Party collapsing this month might be.
No, as long as you
phrase it as a question.
That's right. Hey, good habit, baby. It's got to happen someday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is a lot of internal pressures that are causing a lot of this, but let's start on the outside and work our way in.
Okay.
A big force of external pressure on the Chinese Communist Party. It really seems that, I think mostly thanks to our show and what we've done to educate people, a lot of countries around the world are finally realizing that they need to de-risk or decouple from China. Sort of the romance of China is over, and I think we're largely to.
But some people want to keep the romance alive, Chris.
Some people do. Kissinger is still alive somehow against all odds.
You should see what he's been up to in the pocket dimension.
Oh gosh. We'll leave that breadcrumb, that trail unexplored.
Right. But the Henry Kissinger legacy is essentially diplomacy and relations at all costs.
Engagement. We talked about this a
engagement.
lot
Yeah.
on, well, definitely on China Uncensored and on this show too. China will become a democracy if we just give them lots of money to an authoritarian regime. Makes perfect sense.
What's interesting is that was not Henry Kissinger's initial view. Like in the 70s, the whole engaging with China thing was just a way to counter the power of the Soviet Union.
I don't know. I mean, that was that's how they sold it in a lot of ways. I don't know if that's if he was actually going for.
Yeah, the engagement, I feel like if it wasn't the beginning of it in the 90s is when it really took off, is like the political push across the United States government to say that engagement was going to open up China democratically.
Yeah. And I mean, you saw that with the Bush administration, like the same month of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Well, because Bush Senior.
I was going to say you're talking about George Herbert Walker now.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time in China. And yeah, the month of the Tiananmen Square massacre, he sent like a secret delegation to China to be like, don't worry, this will all blow over. We'll keep relations going. So, because I know what's coming next is we're going to blame Clinton.
He kept his promise.
He did.
Yeah.
Well, he was the ambassador to China, right? So that's what you mean by he spent a lot of time.
Emphasis on ass.
Didn't realize that you could do that.
I didn't know that you could. Yes, I suppose it's a T-shirt. You can't spell ambassador without
door. An ass door.
Okay.
This is why you watch us for our cutting China analysis. You can't get anywhere. You won't get this at the Heritage Foundation.
That's probably true.
That's why they are bigger and more influential than us.
I mean, also explicitly conservative and have a lot of money.
Yeah, we don't have any of those things, particularly the money. But yeah, so that outside for Herbert Walker Bush, because then the next thing comes Clinton, like he just knocked it out of the ballpark with the engagement.
I mean, Clinton has always had a lot of issues with China. I mean,
Clinton has always had a lot of issues, period.
It's not really necessarily the best people who become president.
That's true. But it's not just the presidency. I mean, so Clinton, he did the whole, we give them more by offering them our palm.
The palm of our hand and the back of our fist or something like that.
Yeah, I guess the idea, like, here, have some money.
Here, take everything you want from us, and whatever. If you want to give us something later in exchange, that's great.
No, it's going to be good for the Chinese people, Matt. That's what you don't understand.
Yeah, it'll make them reform somehow.
Yes.
The Communist Party reform somehow. But yeah, I mean, it's not just the presidency. It's like all throughout the government. There, particularly state departments have been awful under the Biden Obama administration. Was terrible, and really, I think we've seen a lot of like the current Biden administration State Department is kind of a horror show too. Like in some ways, I think it's almost been completely won by this engagement school.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so I've heard they have, like I've been talking to Uyghurs, there's Hong Kong activists, and like they're basically, because they don't want to rile up China, they're keeping these people in legal limbo by not giving them asylum status or any kind of permanent residency in the U.S. They're just kind of here and they can't be deported back to China or Hong Kong, but they're just in this horrible limbo because the State Department doesn't want to actually move these things along.
That is awful.
That is awful. Then everything we saw with Blinken and then Yellen's trip to China, how Blinken's trip was supposed to happen.
I have to say, Treasury has always been bad on China.
That's true. Like even under the Trump administration, which I would say was the toughest administration on China, which is a low bar. Yeah,
Mnuchin was not good. Yeah.
But yeah, Blinken's trip to China, like it was supposed to happen during the spy balloon thing, and they tried to cover up the spy balloon so they could get the trip to happen, and it was just too big. And yeah, you really saw like the State Department and Biden administration bending over backwards to just get this trip to happen, diplomacy at any cost.
Interestingly, I feel like Biden himself, his own instincts are kind of against what the State Department is doing. Have you noticed this?
Yeah. Because like at least 3 times he said, the U.S. will defend Taiwan. And then the White House was like, actually, we're not changing our
And then
Taiwan
he
policy.
called Xi Jinping a dictator.
He did.
So he does have those good instincts. he just has to
then
fight the State Department.
What did the most recent thing? He at a fundraiser last week.
He called it the China's Belt and Road. He called it like the Belt and Noose.
It was actually the Debt and Noose.
Oh, well, that's even more clever.
It's even more clever than the Belt and Noose, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a belt you could use as a noose. David Carradine. Oh, let's not go down that rabbit hole.
No. Okay. Yeah. First of all, okay.
So Biden's aware of that, and he's absolutely right to call it out.
He called it the Debt and Noose, and he also said something about how China is a ticking time bomb or something because of their economic crises.
And he said that like when I'm getting this probably a little wrong, but it's like when bad things happen to bad people, they do bad things.
Oh, yes. Something like that.
Yeah. But he was calling them bad people.
Yes.
Which is great. And it is different than like the Trumps.
He also said that like we don't want to like we're not going after China. Like that's not the purpose. Like we're not going after China, but like,
it is a little confused.
You know, where it's kind of like suddenly he remembered what the talking points were supposed to be.
Yeah, it is interesting. But it was also interesting to hear Trump talk about China because it was like, yeah, we're talking massive trade war. They've been screwing us. I love Xi Jinping. He's a great guy.
I mean, it's because Xi Jinping treated him to like 3 hours of Chinese opera in the Forbidden City.
Yes, if there's any way to win over Trump, it's with extended opera.
Chinese opera specifically.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things that the president has to balance, right? Like if you just go on the attack against another country or its leadership, a president might feel like that's not really an advantage. Like I think, so Biden taking an approach like, we're not trying to do this to China. We're just doing these policies for national security, right? And Trump praising Xi Jinping might have had very different, but in a similar vein, it's like allowing Xi Jinping to save face, sort of, so it doesn't rock the boat unnecessarily. Now, I'm not saying I agree with that, but I think that is the calculus that presidents make.
Yeah, I mean, it's just hard to tell how the Communist Party actually receives the message because they don't think like U.S. officials.
Well, I think that's the problem with the State Department's approach is like if you base things on trying not to like piss the CCP off, like trying to be like, oh, like don't anger China, don't do these things that will cause them to become more aggressive. That's just a losing policy because you cannot control what the CCP does by trying to appease them.
Yes.
Okay. I thought there was more coming.
There was, but then I think I was formulating a response and I stopped listening to what you were saying.
Okay.
And so then I realized my response didn't matter.
It didn't matter. Okay. Connect. I was just saying it's like a bad relationship. You can't fix the other person.
So I feel like there's some undercurrent between what you're saying about you and I, Shelley.
What? Mm-hmm. No. What?
Is like some toxic relationship thing going on?
Possibly. Like
what happened while I was in the pocket dimension?
There was an evil goateed Shelley that showed up. Really tried to undermine the team. Really, the goatee should have tipped me off that something was wrong.
Was it like a marker goatee?
Yeah.
Is that from Star Trek where there was like
Star
evil
Trek started
Spock?
That. Yes. Evil Spock. Well, was everyone from the pocket dimension or the evil dimension goateed, or was it just Spock? I think it was just Spock.
But that would be hilarious if everyone was goateed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's essentially the joke about Star Trek. Like on TV tropes, they have the everybody wears a hat planet. Mm-hmm. That's how like Star Trek and shows like that work. It's just like, okay, here's a planet, and they all are this one thing. They have this one characteristic because otherwise it gets to be a little complicated. So yeah, evil dimension, everyone has a goatee.
There you go.
That's if Xi Jinping had a goatee. If all the Chinese officials had goatees, I think things would have been a lot
clearer. No, they were evil. Yeah, there'd be no mistake. Mm-hmm. But all those clean-shaven officials, you can't tell. Maybe they're just benevolent technocrats.
That must be it.
That's why there are no women in the leadership positions of the Chinese Communist Party, because they can't grow a goatee.
And therefore cannot not have a goatee. Because like if you could have a goatee, then it's clear that by not having one, you're not evil.
Yeah.
But if you can't grow goatee, I mean that's the problem with women in general. Like are they evil? Are they not? You can't tell because they can't grow goatees.
I'm suddenly picturing Carrie Lam with a goatee. That's where my mind went.
Oh, Shelley, I think the radiation from that CERN line.
I told you, very tired.
Really? Wow. Okay. So to actual information for our lovely audience who's bearing with our digressions, click like if you like our digressions. Click like if you don't like our digressions, and we will parse that out and cut what you don't like.
Yeah, we'll know.
We know. Secret YouTube analytics, something. So yeah, the Biden administration has been, to give them some credit, very good about understanding some of the tech, sanctions that the U.S. government should be doing to China. Like we really shouldn't be giving them, secret technology to make their military awesome and powerful to be used against us at some point.
When you put it like that, it's almost like having a goatee. Like it should be as obvious as that when you say we shouldn't be giving their military high tech, yeah.
Hey, should we be giving China all these semiconductors to make U.S. aircraft destroyer missiles? I don't know. Those missiles don't have goatees. I can't tell
if they're evil missiles.
Are they really going to be used against U.S. aircraft carriers? I mean, that's what's in the name, but no goatee. Anderson full screen missile with a goatee. Thank you.
So Biden is looking at issuing an executive order that's going to prevent U.S. companies from selling some of this sensitive technology.
Well, technically, he's already signed the executive order, but it's going to take...
There's a 45-day...
public comment
period, where by public comment, it means big corporations with interests are going to try to water it down as much as they can.
Don't worry, Matt. Don't worry, because the big corporations with interests have already been consulted, according to the article I read in the New York Times. So,
And I will just throw this out. There does seem to be a shift in big corporations and even Wall Street on China.
Really?
Well, yeah.
This happened while I was in the pocket dimension?
Yeah. China is no longer the U.S.'s biggest trading partner. It's now Mexico. A lot of manufacturing and industry has been moved to Mexico. A lot of not BlackRock so much, but a lot of other Wall Street companies are getting bearish on China or withdrawing funds.
And here's another thing. I was in a Cracker Barrel recently, and
all right, are you ready for expert analysis? Here we go.
Well, no, like I had this idea a few years ago about doing a Cracker Barrel index, where you go into a Cracker Barrel and you see like how much stuff is made in China versus made in other countries.
I feel like it could also be like the dollar store index or something. Essentially, is what you're saying.
But
then you don't get to go to Cracker Barrel.
Exactly, and Cracker Barrel is its own reward. So, but this last time I saw substantially more products made in Vietnam and other non-China places compared to, I remember we were in a Cracker Barrel in like 2017, Chris, in Florida, and it was just like 95% made in China.
I definitely remember being in a Cracker Barrel in, was it like 2019 or something, and seeing like an Elvis Christmas ornament. And it was like made in Dongguan, China. And I was just wondering, like, what do the factory workers in Dongguan, China think about this? Like,
they're probably thinking I'm hungry.
Like, Christmas is when you have Elvis's face on ornaments. Like,
yeah. Well, but anyway, to that point. So yes, manufacturing is leaving China gradually. And it's less from political pressure from the administration than from
practical business interests.
Yeah, it's like corporations are to some degree seeing the shifting winds.
I mean, they've all been hacked by China, number one.
Right. So, after like 20 years of getting screwed by China.
I think it is positive, but there's still a lot of stuff made in China. Like, I was, getting blood drawn the other day at like a Quest Diagnostics, and I looked around, and so many of the things, like, okay, yes, the Band-Aids are made in China, the syringes are made, the needles are made in China. Like,
yeah, even the coronavirus. Oh God, I've been demonetized.
So the coronavirus protective equipment that we needed was made in China.
But we are not
save,
calling
Matt.
into question any of the medical tools used to treat the pandemic. Everything's great.
Yeah, I think Matt did a better job with that save,
Damn it,
actually.
I'm not good at saving things.
Yeah, but so yeah, like, you know, so you have to worry about the medical supply chain stuff, like things you take for granted, like disposable, like gloves or you know, the face masks, right?
And so, like, yeah, so in 2020, doctors and nurses were being told, especially nurses, told to reuse the same face mask day after day after day.
Same needles.
Maybe not the needles, but like consider. I mean, I don't know if they were actually sterilizing and reusing, but like the whole point is that like we have a giant medical industry that's very sensitive. Like there's a lot of they're not high tech, but they're very like specialized parts. And if we lose our supply chain with that, then a big part of our healthcare system collapses, and people who need treatment might not be able to get the full extent of the treatment that they need.
So that's the stuff we really need to offshore, not just like Christmas ornaments and like stuff you get at the dollar store or, you know.
Well, as to your point about as to your point about the masks, like the Biden administration used a bunch of U.S. taxpayer dollars to buy Chinese-made masks because there was a shortage.
It wasn't just the Biden administration. I remember California spent like millions of dollars.
I think it was like $2 billion or something. It was an enormous amount of money.
And like we should be, that's the opposite of what we should be doing. Unless, so I mean, yeah, decoupling can't be done overnight, but there needs to be like a general consensus and understanding that that is where we are going.
I think when the cost comes, like there has to be another calculation because right now there are now more American companies manufacturing things like surgical masks and like these like face masks than there were before, like which there was one company doing it before the pandemic. And now like there's all these new companies doing it, but then like our hospital is going to go back to buying the Chinese masks because they're cheaper. You know what I mean?
I think that is what's happening.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, so that could be fixed with regulatory change only because hospitals get so much federal funding that they would be subject to U.S. law. This is a good and a bad thing, but it could be used in a positive way. But the better thing is to have the reshoring, or at least getting out of China, driven by U.S. corporate interests. Because when it comes to politics in this country, I think U.S. corporate interests are the dominant player in politics. And when we see those interests shift, we're going to see a lot of benefits.
I do think that the Biden administration, this recent executive order, even though it's probably not going to take effect until next year, given like they have to actually have the comment period and then make the rules, et cetera, like that indicates to U.S. corporate interests, right? Like this is the way the wind is blowing, even though it's kind of a narrow order in terms of it only applies to like AI, like quantum computing, semiconductors, like specific high-tech fields. Like it is the U.S. government coming out and being like, we consider this a national security issue. Like they're probably not going to budge on this, right? Like it draws the line in the sand similar to the Trump administration's banning of Huawei and their whole clean 5G thing, where they're like, look, this is a national security issue. You can argue till you're blue in the face about corporate interests, but there are certain lines that you can't cross. And then that kind of tells Wall Street, okay, you know, it's time to maybe shift your investments or whatever, because there is going to be like all of this regulatory stuff you don't want to deal with, or you're just not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, which is kind of a shame because like the reason Wall Street got all in on China is because the U.S. government was like, hey, go all in on China.
I mean, I think it was both, right? Like it was like the symbiotic, like the corporations were like, we could make a lot of money in China.
But I mean, that still required like specific subsidies and changes.
And, I mean, no, it was like
to make it profitable.
And then government officials were like, we could make a lot of money from corporations that want us to go to China.
It's like, it's the CCP's elite capture works on all levels, right? Like it works in the business world, it works in the government, like world. So then you have both happening at the same time, creating this perfect storm of selling our entire future to an authoritarian regime and then being shocked Pikachu face, right? When they take the money and do bad things with it.
I've been listening to this podcast called The Fall of Civilizations podcast lot of fun.
Okay. Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
see.
it makes me like I sometimes translate it into modern times about like because it's always like and yet this great power this empire had also was the seeds of its own destruction. And then I'm like, huh, what are we doing?
Retreating into the mountains and writing poetry.
Yeah, well, yet specifically what we are doing is that's what we're doing. And I consider this show to be poetry. I mean, the things we say.
Yeah. And, we're not quite hiding in the mountains, but we are hiding deep in a bunker underneath the Empire State
It's like
Building.
a reverse mountain. It's like if you
There
took
you
a
go.
mountain and flipped it and buried it. And then we're at the top of that mountain, which is now deep underground.
It's a cave.
Poetry.
It is poetry, Chris. Yeah.
Poetry. What is the difference between a cave and a mountain?
I mean, there are substantial differences.
Sometimes there are caves in mountains. In fact, often that's where caves are.
But
mountains.
rarely are there mountains in caves.
Not impossible.
But yeah, it's not impossible.
Yeah. So at any rate, we're talking about U.S. corporations gradually moving out of China.
Well, bigger picture, we're talking about the all of the pressures that are facing the CCP right now. We started with external pressures, particularly from the broader cultural shifts in the Western world in general. There's been a lot of suspicion of the Chinese Communist Party growing over the years, but there are a lot of internal pressures, and should we go into some of those now?
I mean, I think we could start with the economy. Like
that's the big one
because it's tied in part to U.S. companies leaving
exactly.
China.
It's like one of those mountains in a cave. You see how it connects.
Yeah. So one piece, but it might be a small piece. I'm not sure of China's economic woes are U.S. corporations reducing their manufacturing footprint. But there's lots of other reasons that China's economy is struggling.
Yeah, I mean, like a simple one is like tourism is way down.
From abroad, you mean?
Yeah. God,
what about internal tourism? Like
most of their tourism is from Taiwan, Hong Kong, or Macau.
Because you need people with money to be the tourists.
Yeah, and I don't know about like within the own provinces, but it was like a change of like millions down to just tens of thousands.
Right, but also when you have domestic tourism, like you're moving money around, but you're not getting in the money from outside. So you need foreign tourists to have a thriving tourism industry because that's the way to actually bring that new currency, those new yuan into your country.
Well, so big picture back in June. Yes, that was last month. I can say back in June. The China's Bureau of Statistics.
It's August now.
Yeah. What did I say?
You said it's last month.
I said back in June.
Yes.
That's fine. You can say back in June.
Way back then. The Bureau of Statistics released a bunch of economic data. And I mean, first of all, we know that any data that comes out of China is a lie.
It's interesting because there was a CNBC article I was reading about the Biden executive order, and it treated the statistics like they were totally normal.
They did that during COVID too. Like, hey, China's doing so great. No one has died. But
I mean, I
nowhere
think
else in the world
after
is that happening.
a while, there was like a lot of contextual information around that number. But
it was weird. Like even like when like it was clear what zero COVID was, and like people were starving in their apartments. Like even the New York Times was like their COVID policies, while effective at first, or like
no, I mean the New York
Times'
China policy is terrible. Like China coverage is
terrible. They
terrible.
did a report on the Biden executive order, and it really was like reading the People's Daily.
Like the framing in the first paragraph was essentially like Biden is upping his, confrontation with China by issuing this executive order.
Have all kinds of economic problems.
Yeah, so it's very much like you might as well just reprint the China Daily article because that is the framing that the CCP wants, is that the U.S. is aggressing on China by doing this when it's actually just, again, like you said, Chris, trying not to give like military technology to an authoritarian regime that says it is at war with us.
Do you think if those missiles had goatees, the New York Times would figure it out?
Maybe if the semiconductor fab plants in China had goatees.
Anderson, full screen, semiconductor, goatee. Thank you. I'm making you work this podcast. I'm sorry. So yes, economic numbers are very like even like the official ones are bad. So we know the situation
But
is
the funny
much
thing
worse.
that the CNBC article was like, China's growth, according to like the statistics, was only like 5 point whatever
6.3.
6.3%. And then it said, well, the US's growth rate was 2.6 or something. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, that's very misleading.
Yeah,
for
and
so many reasons.
that's very deceptive because that seems like, oh yeah, we're being, unbiased, we're giving like this full picture. But no, that's not what they're doing. They're actually making things less clear.
Yeah. So anyway, Chris, continue with how terrible 6.3 is in the context of the
Well,
Chinese
so basically,
economy.
the Chinese economy was shut down for 2-3 years because of zero COVID. The only economy they had was the COVID economy, which also racked up a lot of debt. I think the current statistics are that local debt is like $23 trillion. I mean, that's pretty crazy. But there was this idea, and I think this is also playing a part in like the Wall Street disenfranchisement of China. I don't know if that's the right word. I don't know if that is a word. I don't know what words are. But yeah, there was this idea that once they open back up again, the economy is going to surge. And initially, it seemed like there was a big upswing. Like suddenly, people were going out to restaurants, going to movies. But then that just plummeted, and there was no massive rebound. And like that's pretty clear. So clear that the Chinese Communist Party can't even really lie about it. No, they're lying about it, but they're just not.
They're still massaging the numbers, but they can only massage them so far.
Yeah. So it's like this horrible death cycle that the Chinese economy is in, where particularly like youth unemployment is insanely high.
Officially, it's 21%, which
I think it's officially gone up to 23.
Which so even if it's 23, if it's actually 23, that's still
1 in 5.
But that's crisis level unemployment.
Yeah.
But if we assume
it's youth unemployment, if we didn't
youth unemployment,
specify.
Okay. So that's not as bad as overall unemployment, but nonetheless, if it's what we're seeing is like, kids who graduate from college and they're, essentially being told by the party, like, go to college and study this, and then you'll get a job. And this is like our promise to you, right? You just don't go against us. Don't go against the party and take this career path and you'll be okay. And now those youth are seeing like, actually, I just got my college degree and I've applied for 100 jobs and I have 0 job offers.
Well, let me just phrase it more simple than that. You have a bunch of angry young men who don't have jobs and can't find a wife. Yeah. I feel like if this were an episode of the Fall of Civilizations podcast, I would hear, and then the youths had, well, something. They'd be more clever than what I can come up with. But yeah, that is a huge crisis facing the party right now. You just have a bunch of unemployed, angry young men with no prospects, no future. And the Communist Party response to the youth unemployment is pretty bad. Like, youth in China were already like very cynical and depressed. Like, there was the lay flat movement, which was just about, like, everything's screwed, let's just lay flat. Or then there was the let it rot movement, just everything's falling apart, just let everything completely collapse. A couple movements like that. People, young people are not getting married, they're not having kids.
I mean, it's too expensive.
Yeah, they have no prospects.
I mean, like, if you're 24 years old and you don't have a job, or the best job you can get is like food delivery or something, you're going to have a hard time finding a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a spouse. Like, it's just.
Yeah.
I think there's also, we do not know exactly what the situation is in the countryside versus the urban.
Yes, because they don't keep those statistics are not kept.
So, like, if, you have people in Shanghai or Beijing, like, you might not be seeing just how bad it is versus, like, people who are, those are more highly educated people going for white-collar jobs, like, versus, like, if the factory jobs that had actually been like the backbone of like China's economy since the 90s, right? Like, they're all going away, and that upward mobility is no longer there for Chinese factory workers. Then you have like this whole other level of issues that, is not going to be addressed because that's less visible.
Yeah, and Xi Jinping's response has not been good. There's a lot of resentment because he said, well, he's going back to like the Cultural Revolution era. Hey, go to the countryside and work.
On what?
On the countryside.
I mean, I guess that's what he had to do as a kid.
It's true, he did. And look at him now. He's the president of China. But there was also a quote of him. He told people to just eat bitterness, which, it's specifically, I've heard some people in the West translate as eat grass. I know. It's, the Chinese turku. It's eat bitterness. It means
but
like
it just
endure
means
hardship.
still endure hardship. Like, yeah, like, I mean, technically it's eat bitterness, but like it just
It's
means
like gird up your loins and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
I mean, but like that's not an uncommon Chinese phrase.
Yeah, but also not this response any young people want to hear.
It sounds like he's kind of being like a Chinese dad in some ways, where he's like, oh, well, you got to suffer some hardship,
It builds character.
Yes, that kind of thing. Pull up bootstraps, etc. Yeah.
When I was your age, there was a famine. I murdered my best friend because he was a counter-revolutionary.
I walked to the countryside upward both ways in the snow. Yeah.
Well, so in the 1960s, when Mao Zedong was sending people from the city into the countryside, so the conditions, firstly, were very different, which is the countryside was still, this is where a lot of the work was being done to produce food. It was a lot more manual 60 years ago in terms of food production. And there were a lot fewer people living in the cities that had to be sent out to the countryside. Now, the conditions in the countryside are much worse because there's no jobs in the countryside. A lot of the harvesting of grain and other things is done mechanically. So there's less human work to be done, which is why there are fewer jobs. And then, on top of that, right now you're seeing like the massive flooding in northeastern China is like ruining big parts of China's crop production. So there's like even fewer jobs.
And fewer food.
Yeah, so less food, fewer foods. So now, like, even if you try to apply the same idea, which is not a good idea when Mao did it, it was a bad idea at the time.
I mean, it was for political reasons.
Right.
It wasn't
your mom.
Yeah. Both my parents went to the countryside.
Yeah.
Yep.
They spoke highly of it.
Yeah. Well, my dad's stories are always about food, essentially, like being able to like eat watermelons in the fields and stuff like that.
Okay.
Like my mom ended up teaching at a one-room schoolhouse in the countryside, and my dad was a farm laborer.
Mm-hmm.
Not the best time of their lives, no.
But the watermelons were good.
But the watermelons were great because, you could actually like eat your fill of the watermelons.
Well, now all the soil's poisoned, so you can't even.
Well, I think the thing is that this actually goes back to what you were saying, Chris, about like the local government debt, because, what has been happening is people have been going from the countryside to the cities for jobs. So now that like these unemployed youth are being told to go to the countryside, in the last few years at least, they were being told to like go do government work, like go be like civil servants, etc.
Oh yeah.
In the countryside. So then the burden of paying these people to go to like these rural areas and like try to like revitalize them is being put on the local governments.
Massive government bureaucracy,
And then there's already this massive amount of local government debt, right? Which the central government has said, sorry guys, you're on your own. We're not going to cover this for you. And then you're just kind of piling on more and more economic stress on the local government side.
And then that goes into, hey, how did the local governments make most of their money?
Like selling farmland to developers.
Real estate.
Yeah.
But I'll just say one thing, that from an economic standpoint, if the Communist Party is trying to lift up employment by having people do more government jobs, it's not going to help their economy overall, because it still costs money to pay people, and the government has to get the money from somewhere, which is tax dollars.
I mean, it's not a great solution.
It's still eating itself. Like if you're creating unnecessary government jobs, then like you may be helping those individuals, but overall you're actually subtracting from your own economy. You certainly mathematically you can't possibly build on it with unproductive government jobs. So if they try to do this to kind of reduce the like youth anger by giving people jobs, it's going to end up then having a very bad spillover effect
It's like
later.
the ghost cities.
I think it's even like those civil service jobs aren't actually easy to get. So I don't know that they're inflating massive amounts of civil service jobs for this issue. But the interesting thing that you made me think of that is like when my parents were young, everybody worked for the government, right? Because it was like a communist system. Like there were no private employers, etc. So it's almost like they're going back to their roots. Like now,
It was all a scam. It reminds me of The Simpsons when they were at the UN and like Russia is like, it was all a trick, and they tear off Russia on their little placard and it's the USSR again.
wow.
The Simpsons predicted it. Slightly wrong country though.
Well, I mean,
Then again,
we don't know what's gonna happen with Russia.
yeah,
like
we don't do it.
It could happen. The Simpsons could still be right.
God, who knew that show was like a focal nexus of reality? Okay. Well, I think the other giant elephant in the room,
besides my mustache,
it's twice I used that. I need to diversify my language profile.
Were you going to talk about real estate?
No. Yeah, we were going to talk about real estate. Yeah, let's talk about real estate first. I'll save my thing.
Okay.
So yeah, real estate sucks in China. No. Real estate accounts for like 30% of China's GDP, so a huge amount. And like everyone kind of knows now that it's been blowing up for the past several years. It really began with Evergrande. But yeah, this whole process of like, hey, we can just take on debt to build a house that we won't actually build yet, but we'll sell that house, the promise of that future house, to make more money to pay off our debt. And then we'll use this money to build houses eventually.
It's the Ponzi scheme of apartment buildings.
Yeah, and so then like it all came to roost, and there were no homes. There was just debt, and a bunch of real estate industry began to collapse. And the big one that just happened was I have unfortunately gone off my notes.
Country Garden.
Country Garden. It sounds like a Chinese restaurant.
It really does.
I love their General Tso's chicken. And now this isn't set in stone yet because they still have a 30-day grace period before they can be labeled as a defaulter. But it seems like they're going into default.
Just on their dollar-denominated debt, right?
Invest your money in BlackRock, triple your investment in China.
I mean, who cares about the dollar-denominated debt? You're just screwing over foreign investors in that case.
Oh, yeah.
The real unrest doesn't happen until, the people inside China who've lost all their money come for you.
Yes. But yeah, so Country Garden is significant because it's one of the few major private developers that hadn't exploded. But yeah, it seemed like this is
until now.
And though basically the only way like local governments can't raise taxes, and so they don't get funding from the central government. Like real estate was their big moneymaker.
After the one-child policy.
Fining people for reproducing. What a system! What a meritocracy! Why can't we have that in the U.S.?
Oh my god!
And there are people who say that. I hope they get crushed by the elephant in the room.
The elephant just sits down.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a bad situation, and I think what this shows, Country Garden situation also shows, is that like what has been propping up the Chinese economy, and we've been saying this for many years, is foreign investment.
Yes, and if that goes, the Chinese Communist Party will collapse in exactly 23 hours and 44 seconds. Thumbnail, Xi Jinping on fire. I'm good at YouTubes.
Well, the problem is they always suck the foreign investors back in.
That really will be the trick. Like, have foreign investors figured it out at this point? Will that money come pumping back in? And it seems unlikely because, like, even China itself with like its espionage law, Foreign Relations Act, they're doing things to make foreign business in China even more difficult.
They're raiding companies, right?
Raiding companies, like they're making basically anything a national security issue. And this has a lot of foreign companies pretty freaked out because there are things that are being targeted that are just a normal part of doing business in China.
And we have interviewed people who like have come up under these kinds of things before.
Yeah, businessmen who were just in jail in China.
Yes, for doing things that would be considered like normal corporate, like uh, like research or like background checks.
Yeah,
and then now
because
you're
when
in
everything
prison.
is a state secret.
Yes, so this makes it worse, but like the problem with these foreign investors is they're not really investing their own money.
Yeah.
So like the risk reward ratio is way out of whack for them. Yeah, I mean, does BlackRock care if they're just losing, California's pension funds in China? I mean, are they gonna get in trouble
But
for
even
it?
BlackRock recently, I think just either last month or this month, came out with a report that is like, yeah, the risk between like a US-China conflict is actually very high, higher than with like Russia and North Korea.
Oh, but they could be saying that to try to de-escalate, right?
I don't know. Like
Yeah.
this was like for investors. So maybe there is even like it's kind of getting into even BlackRock's world. Like, hey, maybe a conflict is coming. Maybe this could be a problem. I'm not holding my breath. But it does seem like if ever there was a time for like the investment to not come back into China, like I think if there had been that big COVID rebound in China, it would have happened.
Like if all by COVID rebound you mean like all the economy comes
The
roaring
economy
back,
comes
etc.
back from
Okay.
COVID. Yeah, if it had really been like, oh wow, yeah, everything's roaring back, lots of money to be made, then it probably would have happened. But I think
there's a chicken and egg element here, which is that part of the reason China's economy can't roar back is because there isn't as much foreign investment in China, which is why the Chinese economy can't roar back, which is why there's less foreign investment in China.
But also, I mean, it's the CCP's own fault for doing things like
being evil.
I haven't seen a goatee.
How do we know?
You're right. I'm just speculating.
Full screen Xi Jinping with a goatee on fire.
Is the goatee made of fire?
It's the goatee of fire.
I did not see that this is where the podcast was going to go. But
where did you think it was going to go when it was just the three of us, Shelley?
I forgot in the pocket dimension.
Yeah. Time travels differently.
And you came back just for this.
Yes, just specifically for this podcast.
But let me make an analogy that I haven't made before. It's like there's an elephant in the room. We still don't know how many people have died from COVID in China. This is a big mystery. And there's like really some disturbing statistics. Recently, Zhejiang province released some statistics about cremation. And it was up like 73% from like the previous 2 years. In fact, when people were like, hey, that's a big increase in cremation at the beginning of 2023 when zero COVID was rolled back quite suddenly. And then they scrubbed everything from that. And now like...
I'm sure it was just like a calculation error.
Yeah. Well, now local governments are not reporting cremation statistics anymore. And so like the big question is like, really, we have no idea how many people there really even are in China anymore. And that could be having a big impact on the economy. Like, is part of the reason the economy didn't come roaring back is because there's just not enough people to go back to the restaurants and the movies and the jobs.
But then you'd think the unemployment numbers would be better.
Yeah, but also like when a business, when like people who are, have small businesses or whatever, those get shut down, like little restaurants get closed down, or those people pass away. Like that's reducing employment opportunities, right? So the widespread destruction of small business across China's economy during zero COVID, mostly due to the policy, but maybe also partly due to people dying, is what has a huge impact on employment. I mean, in most countries, most of the jobs are in small businesses, right? And so the Communist Party made a huge mistake by curtailing small business, as did every other government. But
because every other government was like, wow, China's very successful. Look at their numbers. We should implement their policies.
Yeah, but no country did it as much as China.
Despite the New York Times really suggesting that maybe freedom was interfering in effective COVID policies.
Yes. Well, it's okay to curtail people's freedom as long as it's other people and not you.
You know what? Should the New York Times have a goatee? Full screen, front page of the New York Times, big old goatee. Now we know.
Real estate companies are collapsing in on themselves because of massive debt. People can't find jobs. U.S. companies are pulling out of China. So, yeah, the Communist Party is not in a great situation right now.
You know what will fix things? Purges.
All right, because that is going on.